Hello, dear friends. Before we begin, if you find this story worthwhile, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss similar stories. As you listen, if any part of this touches your heart, please leave a comment to share your thoughts with everyone. I love knowing that my stories are reaching people from all corners of the country. You are Eleanor Clarke. Before this terrible story began, your life in the small town of Oakage, Kentucky, flowed in a steady, predictable rhythm. The year was 1972. You were 37 years old, a family woman, the wife of pharmacist Arthur Clarke. This town was so small that everyone seemed to know everyone else's business, from whose farm had a new crop of corn to which girl was being courted by which boy. And in that tiny world, you and Arthur were seen as a model couple, a symbol of stability and respectability. Your marriage didn't spring from a romance novel kind of love. It was an arrangement, a pact between two distinguished families, a common practice at the time. You walked down the aisle, not with a fiercely beating heart, but with a deep respect for the man who would become your husband. Arthur was tall, with sharp green eyes, and most notably, the characteristic birthmark on his right cheek that every man in the Clarke clan possessed. He was a pharmacist, and in a rural town, that role was nearly equivalent to a doctor's. He was respected, even a little feared. You accepted your role a wife who cared for the home, a capable homemaker. And you did it very well. Your house was always clean, your garden always in bloom, and the meals you cooked were your quiet pride. Among all the dishes you made, your soup was the best. You didn't make it from canned ingredients. No, you used bone broth. You simmered for hours the freshest vegetables from your backyard garden, and a secret herb that only you knew. Its aroma filled the house, a scent of warmth, of family, of the peace you believed you had. And it was this very soup that became the heart of the secret that shattered your life. It all began as a silent ritual. Every Thursday evening after the two of you finished your meal, Arthur would carefully ladle a large portion of soup into a food container. "I'm taking this to a poor homeless man," he said the first time, his face filled with a sad, charitable look. Your heart melted with pride. Your husband, the respectable Arthur, was not only a pillar of the community, but also a man with a golden heart. You smiled, even encouraged him. "Make sure you give him the part with plenty of meat, poor man." And so the ritual began. Week after week, month after month, year after year. Every Thursday evening, you would cook a larger pot of soup than usual. And Arthur, after dinner, would quietly prepare the portion for his homeless man. But time, like a slow-moving river, can erode even the strongest rocks of innocence. You began to notice little details that didn't fit the story of a simple act of charity. First was the care he took. Arthur didn't just pour the soup into the container and leave. He would line the container with a clean linen napkin, one of the ones you had embroidered with a pattern in the corner. He would use a small string to tie it into a neat, perfect bow. Who does that for a stranger living on the streets, you wondered? That level of care felt like it was for a loved one, not a passerby. Then came the refusal. One evening, you suggested, "Arthur dear, why don't I come with you someday? I'd like to meet the man you've been helping for so long." The change in his expression was subtle, but you saw it. A flicker of panic, a flash of annoyance in his green eyes. "No, dear," he replied, his voice straining to sound casual. "He's very shy, very self-conscious. He might be frightened off and not show up if he sees a woman." The explanation seemed plausible, but it left a small ripple of doubt in your heart. That ripple grew larger, especially on days with bad weather. Oakage had bitter cold winters and dreary, bone-chilling rains. On those days, Arthur would become strangely restless. He would pace around the house, constantly looking out the window, his hand fiddling with the pocket watch in his waistcoat. Sometimes you'd catch him muttering to himself. Will he be there? Will he have found shelter? In your mind, the questions began to scream. What homeless man could make your husband worry so much? Why was it such a deep personal concern? His care went far beyond normal compassion. It was almost paternal. But you dismissed the thought. It was ridiculous. The two of you had no children. And then the fateful night arrived. A Thursday evening in June 1972. The sky broke open. A cold, torrential rain lashed against the windows, as if demanding to be let in. All day, Arthur had been on edge. Dinner was silent, filled only with the sound of the rain and the clinking of silverware on plates. You spoke, trying to break the tension. "Arthur, perhaps tonight isn't a good night to go out. This storm won't be letting up soon." He answered almost instantly, his voice holding an urgency he couldn't hide. "I have to go. He'll be waiting." In that moment, something inside you broke. Not the man, but he. And the way he said, "He'll be waiting," wasn't a hope, but a certainty. It was an appointment, a promise. Right then, you knew this story was not just about Charity. There was a deep secret being hidden, and you had to find it. As soon as the door closed behind Arthur, you rushed to the phone. Your fingers trembled as you dialed. On the other end of the line was Gertrude, the one true friend you could trust completely. "Gertrude," you whispered as if Arthur could still hear you. "I need your help. Tonight I have to find out where Arthur goes with that soup every Thursday." Gertrude didn't ask many questions. She was the kind of friend who understood the gravity in your voice. "I'm on my way," was all she said. 15 minutes later, Gertrude was at your door with an old umbrella and a spare raincoat for you. The two of you rushed out into the downpour, trying to keep a safe distance, so you wouldn't be seen, but close enough not to lose sight of Arthur. The town's main street was deserted, the streetlights blurring in the rain. Arthur walked with a clear purpose, never looking back. He turned down the alley near the old sawmill, then continued toward the edge of town to a nearly abandoned area. Your heart hammered against your ribs. Where was he going? Finally, he stopped in front of a small, crooked house, tucked away on a desolate plot of land. You and Gertrude hid behind a large tree, holding your breath as you watched. Arthur raised his hand and knocked on the door, in a peculiar rhythm. 3 short taps, a pause, then 2 more taps. A code. The door opened almost immediately. And that's when you saw him, a young man about 15 years old. Even from a distance through the misty rain, your heart skipped a beat. The boy, he looked exactly like a young Arthur. The same high-bridged nose, the same thick eyebrows, and especially, oh dear Lord above, the characteristic birthmark on his right cheek. Good heavens, Gertrude whispered. Beside you, she had seen it too. But the thing that drove the final nail into the coffin of lies was hearing Arthur's voice uncharacteristically gentle ringing through the night. Son, I've brought you dinner. Come inside now. It's cold out here, son. Son? The word dropped like a stone in your chest, crushing the air from your lungs. The young man hugged Arthur with a familiar ease, and they both stepped inside. The door was left ajar, and through the curtainless window you could hear them talking. Your soup is still the best, Dad? The boy's voice rang out. Your mother. She always knew how to cook like no one else, Arthur replied. Loretta would be so proud to see how tall and smart you've become. Loretta. The name struck your mind like a bolt of lightning. Loretta, the young maid, who had worked in your house, who had suddenly disappeared nearly 16 years ago. Arthur had said she'd gone back to her family in another state. All the painful pieces now fit together perfectly. The vanished maid, the 15-year-old son, and the soup you made that he claimed was just like Loretta's. Tears began to stream down your face, mixing with the cold raindrops. 16 years of lies. 16 years of believing in the kindness of a man who had hidden a son from you. A son he had with the maid during your very own marriage. The castle of a marriage you thought you had so carefully built, brick by brick, had just crumbled to dust before your very eyes, all because of a simple container of soup you prepared every Thursday night. The walk home that night was a blur of pain. The rain still fell, but you no longer felt the cold. A numbness washed over you, a layer of ice forming deep in your chest and spreading through your body. Gertrude walked beside you, her umbrella shielding you both, but no shield could protect you from the storm raging in your soul. She didn't say much, only squeezed your arm, a silent, steady presence. When you reached your door, you turned to her. You should go home, Gertrude. I need to be alone. She looked at you, her eyes full of worry. Are you sure, Eleanor? You nodded with a resolve you didn't know you had. I'm sure. I'm not going to do anything crazy. I just need to think. Stepping into your home, everything suddenly felt foreign. The armchair where Arthur read the paper, the rug you had chosen yourself, the family photos on the wall. They were all props in a play where you had unknowingly been the leading lady for 16 years. You dragged yourself upstairs to the bedroom and lay down, pretending to be asleep. An hour later, Arthur returned. You heard the soft click of the front door, the sound of his footsteps on the hardwood floors, the water running in the bathroom. Then the mattress beside you dipped. You could feel the warmth of his body, hear the steady breathing of the man you had shared a bed with for all those years. But tonight, He was a stranger, a monster disguised as a respectable husband. The physical closeness was torture. You didn't sleep a second that night. Your mind was a film playing in reverse, replaying every moment, every memory. The sweet words, the caring gestures, all of them now stained with deceit. The Thursday soup. Oh God, the soup! For all those years, you had personally prepared meals for your husband's son with another woman. You had poured your love and care into that soup, unwittingly enabling his deception. The initial pain slowly crystallized, not into a fiery rage, but into a sharp diamond of resentment. You knew that screaming or crying would solve nothing. It would only turn you into a hysterical, pitiful wife. No, you would not give him the satisfaction of seeing you break. The justice you sought had to be calculated, precise, and it had to strike where it would hurt him most. The next morning, you woke before Arthur. You went downstairs, made coffee, and prepared breakfast as usual. Your hands didn't tremble. You placed the plate of eggs and bacon in front of him with a mechanical smile. He didn't notice a thing. Men like him, so accustomed to being served and to their wives' silence, rarely see the storm gathering right before their eyes. His obliviousness only strengthened your resolve. You waited. Patience became your new weapon. You waited until Sunday afternoon when Arthur had his weekly dominoes game with friends at the local tavern. That's when you made your move. You took some savings you had secretly tucked away, a self-preservation habit of every woman of that era, and walked alone back to the desolate plot of land on the edge of town. This time, the sky was clear, but your heart beat harder than it had in the storm. You stood before the crooked wooden door and knocked. Using the exact code you had seen, Arthur used 3 short taps, a pause, 2 more taps. The door opened, and the boy David stood there, looking directly into his eyes at close range. Your heart ached. He was a perfect copy of a young Arthur, but he had Darlene's large, sad, and expressive eyes. Upon seeing you, his face turned pale with fear. He stepped back, about to slam the door shut. "Wait," you said, your voice firm, but not hostile. "My name is Eleanor. I am Mr. Arthur Clarke's wife." Horror filled the boy's eyes. He stammered, repeating the story he had been taught. "I have nothing to do with your husband, ma'am. He just brings me food sometimes, out of pity. I'm an orphan." You looked straight at him. "I know who you are," you said. "I know you are the son of Arthur and Darlene, who used to work in my house." David's defenses crumbled. His eyes welled up with tears, and he lowered his head. "I don't want to cause any trouble," he whispered. "Father said no one could ever know about me, that it would ruin his life and yours." You asked to come inside. The small house was just 1 room, simple, but clean and tidy. There were school books on the table and academic certificates on the wall. You sat down and listened, and David told you the whole tragic story of his life, about the mother he never really knew, who had died from complications after childbirth, without proper medical care, because Arthur was afraid of being discovered. about a lonely childhood in this house, cared for by a paid woman for the first few years, and then left to fend for himself. About the father who visited only once a week, bringing food money and instructions to keep the secret. He says he loves me. David finished, his voice choked with tears. But I've never been allowed to call him Dad in public. Hearing that story, your resentment was no longer just for Arthur's betrayal of you, but for his cruelty and cowardice. He had denied this boy a family, a normal life, just to protect his own reputation. Finally, David showed you the only precious thing he had from his mother, a small locket. Inside was a picture of Darlene, and on the back was an inscription, D.A. and A.C., and a date, May 12th, 1956, a knife twisted in your heart. You had married Arthur in 1965. That meant their affair had started long before you were in the picture. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a parallel life, a systematic deception. You took David's hand. None of this is your fault, you said. You are a victim just like me. And starting today, your life is going to change. You returned home, your resolve solidified. You needed more proof, undeniable weapons. You waited patiently again. The following Thursday evening, you prepared the soup as usual. When Arthur left with the container, you simply smiled and wished him a good evening. He suspected nothing. As soon as he was gone, you did something you had never dared to do before you entered his private office. You searched, opening every drawer, and you found it in a file hidden at the bottom of the last drawer. Monthly payment receipts for the woman who had cared for David. Tuition receipts from the school in the next county. David's birth certificate with only Darlene's name as the mother and the father section left blank. But the most damning thing was yet to come. Tucked between the papers was a handwritten letter from Darlene, written just days before she died, as if she had sensed her fate. In the letter, she begged Arthur to take care of their son. And at the end, she revealed that Arthur had promised to leave you for her, a promise he never kept. I know you love Eleanor in your own way, she wrote, but I also know you love me differently, more deeply. Why can't you find the courage to follow your heart? You cried not just for the betrayal, but for the cruelty, for the cowardice of the man you called your husband. He had deceived everyone. When Arthur returned, you were waiting for him in the living room. All the evidence, the papers, the letter, the locket you had borrowed from David, was laid out on the coffee table. His face went white when he saw the display. He stammered, trying to offer some kind of explanation. You cut him off, your voice as cold as ice. I don't want to hear any more lies, Arthur. I know everything. I've met David. I've read Darlene's letter. I know your affair started before we were married. I know you promised to leave me for her. I know you let her die without help to protect your precious reputation. And I know you've hidden your son like a dirty secret for all these years. Arthur collapsed onto the sofa, drained of all strength, with nothing left to say. Silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock, counting down the seconds of their ruin. Finally, he asked in a barely audible voice, "What are you going to do?" You looked directly at him with a steadiness you never knew you possessed. This wasn't a husband's question, but a criminal's waiting for his sentence. "And you?" You would be the judge. I am going to do what should have been done 15 years ago, you declared. I am going to bring David to where he rightfully belongs. I am going to give him the name he is entitled to. And as for us, Arthur, there is no more us. After that terrible night of confrontation, your house was no longer a home. It became a silent battlefield. There was no shouting, no fiery arguments. Instead, a chilling coldness settled in an invisible but insurmountable distance between you and Arthur. You decided to maintain appearances for the time being because you knew that in a small town like Oakage in 1972, a divorce would be a scandal, and the woman would always bear the brunt of the stigma. But your silence was not submission. It was preparation. Arthur begged you not to reveal anything, especially about David. Eleanor, please. He pleaded, the pride of a respectable man shattered. This will destroy my reputation. It was always about his reputation, you thought bitterly, never about anyone else's feelings. You looked at him, a terrifying calm washing over you. Don't worry, Arthur, you replied. I'm not going to spread your dirty story all over town. I'm going to do something much worse. In the following days, you meticulously laid out your plan. First, you went to Louisville to visit your sister Gertrude. In her cozy kitchen, you told her the entire story. Gertrude, who had always been your safe harbor, readily agreed to help. David would live with her temporarily to continue his schooling far from Arthur's influence. When you returned, you presented Arthur with your terms. These were not suggestions or requests. They were commands. You sat across from him in the living room, where just days before you had exposed the truth. First, you began your voice flat and emotionless. David will be legally recognized as your son. You will complete the adoption process and give him your last name. But Eleanor, the whole town will, he protested weakly. You ignored him. Second, you will transfer half of your assets to my name, including a share of the pharmacy. The pharmacy is my family's inheritance. You can't. Third, you continued, giving him no chance to argue. David will live with my sister in Louisville to finish his education. You will cover all his expenses, school clothes, food, and college, if he chooses to go. This will bankrupt me. Fourth, from this day forward, you will sleep in the back storage room. I will not share a bed with a man of no character. He stared at you stunned. He had probably never imagined that the submissive wife of all these years could transform into such an iron-willed woman. And if I refuse? He asked, trying to regain some semblance of control. You calmly opened your purse and took out an envelope. In that case, copies of these, you said, placing them on the table. All the documents, Darlene's letter, and a few photos I took of the house where you hid your son will be sent to Father Anthony, Sheriff Joshua, and my father. Arthur's face drained of color. He knew you weren't bluffing. Your father, a stern, traditional man, would probably kill him if he knew how his daughter had been treated. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. You finished leaving him alone with his ruin. The next morning, Arthur agreed to all your conditions. But how will we explain the sudden appearance of a 15-year-old son? He asked. That's when you revealed the final part of your plan, the part that would be your true revenge. We will say David is your nephew, the son of a deceased brother who lived far away. Since he has no one left, we decided to adopt him. He nodded a glimmer of hope for a less humiliating way out. But you extinguished it immediately. After all the paperwork is done, after David is safe with my sister, and his future is secure, after you've transferred the assets to my name, then, my dear husband, this entire town will know the truth. Not from my lips, but from yours. Your revenge would not be swift and explosive. It would be a prolonged psychological torture, slowly burning him from the inside out. In the following weeks, the plan was set in motion. You went to pick up David and drove him to Louisville. That trip changed something deep inside you. Sitting next to you in the car was a timid boy, frightened by the immense changes in his life. At first, he was a tool in your plan for revenge. But then, midway through the journey, he turned to you and asked hesitantly, Will you be like a mother to me? The question struck your heart. Until that moment, you had acted out of anger. You hadn't considered your relationship with David. If you'd like, you answered honestly, I'm not your birth mother, and I can never replace Darlene. But I can care for you and make sure you have a good future. The boy smiled a shy but sincere smile. I'd like that. In that instant, you realized David was not a tool. He was an innocent victim, and he deserved to be loved. You decided that whatever happened to your marriage, you would be a mother to this boy. When you returned to Oakage, the story of the orphaned nephew spread. The town expressed its sympathy. The women at the church praised your kindness. The men patted Arthur on the back, admiring his sense of responsibility. You just smiled and endured the hypocrisy. David stayed with you for 2 weeks before moving to Louisville, and during that brief time, you deliberately took him everywhere, making sure everyone got a good look at his face, a mirror image of Arthur's. Years passed. You and Arthur lived like strangers under the same roof. At the pharmacy where you began working after claiming your share, you took control. You managed the books and dealt with customers while Arthur was relegated to the back doing menial tasks. Meanwhile, David thrived in Louisville. The letters he sent were full of joy about school new friends and his plans for the future. With every letter, every visit, your pride grew. The love you had for David completely overshadowed your desire for revenge. Now, your goal wasn't to destroy Arthur, but to build a bright future for David. In 1975, 3 years after you discovered the truth, the letter you had been waiting for arrived. David had been accepted into the University of Kentucky College of Medicine. Your heart swelled with pride. The boy who had been hidden away in a shabby house was going to become a doctor. That's when you decided it was time for the second phase of your plan. You threw a large party at your home to celebrate. You invited all the important families in town, the people Arthur had always tried to impress. The house was lavishly decorated. David, now a tall, handsome young man in a new suit you'd bought him, stood beside you, beaming. When all the guests had arrived, you picked up a crystal glass and tapped it lightly. All eyes turned to you. My friends, you began, your voice clear and strong. Thank you all for coming to this very special celebration. As you know, we are celebrating David's acceptance into medical school. Applause filled the room. You smiled and continued. Many of you met David 3 years ago when he first came to live with us. At the time, we told you he was Arthur's nephew. You glanced at Arthur, standing in the corner of the room, his face pale. He knew what was coming. But tonight, you said, your voice filled with pride, I want to share the truth with all of you. David is not Arthur's nephew. He is his son. A shocked murmur spread through the room. You ignored the confused stares and continued with a slightly edited version of the story to preserve some of your dignity. Due to difficult circumstances, he had to grow up away from us. But now is the time to publicly acknowledge him as a rightful member of the Clarke family. You turned to Arthur, who looked as if he was about to faint. I believe my husband would also like to say a few words. You had cornered him in front of the very society he worshipped. He couldn't deny it, and he couldn't run. On trembling legs, Arthur came forward. He took a deep breath and spoke, his voice cracking. It's true, David is my biological son. His mother passed away in childbirth, and out of cowardice I hid him away. It was the greatest mistake of my life. He turned to you. Eleanor, she accepted David as her own son when she learned the truth. She had the courage and love that I lacked. If he is on his way to becoming a doctor today, it is largely thanks to her. Silent tears streamed down David's face. The guests were stunned. That night you had your revenge not with screams or violence, but by exposing the truth, forcing Arthur to face the judgment of the society he feared most. In the years that followed, Arthur withered. He became a shadow in his own life, living with the quiet contempt of the town. He started drinking, and his health declined. In 1985, David graduated from medical school. 3 months after his son's graduation party, Arthur died of a heart attack. At the funeral, you did not cry. Your tears for him had dried up on that stormy night many years ago. Ironically, the only person who cried sincerely was David. After the funeral, you sold the pharmacy. You had no reason to stay in Oakage. David had accepted a position as a doctor in Chicago and invited you to live with him. You accepted without hesitation. It was time for a new beginning. Leaving Oakage, you didn't feel bitter or triumphant. You just felt at peace. Arthur's betrayal could have destroyed you. But instead, it had given you a son you loved dearly, and a strength you never imagined you had. In 1985, at the age of 50, you set foot in Chicago. It was like being born again. Leaving the small town of Oakage, where every street corner and every face was a reminder of the past, you felt an overwhelming sense of freedom. Chicago was a different world. The skyscrapers, the endless streams of traffic, the bustling sounds of a big city. At first, you felt lost, a country woman in a concrete jungle. But that feeling was quickly replaced by excitement. For the first time in your life, you were completely anonymous. No one knew you as the wife of pharmacist Clarke. No one knew your tragic story. You were simply Eleanor. David had arranged a comfortable life for you. He insisted on giving you the master bedroom in his Lincoln Park apartment, a beautiful neighborhood with lush green trees. "You deserve the best, Mom," he'd say. And every time you heard the word Mom from his lips, your heart filled with an indescribable emotion. It was a simple title, but for both of you, it held a journey of healing and love. In the first few months, while David was busy with his work at the hospital, you spent your time exploring your new life. You befriended Mrs. Conway, a kind widow in the apartment next door. She taught you how to ride the L train, how to haggle at the farmer's market, and where to find the best shops. Eleanor, she told you one day, "We women can't just sit still. We need a purpose." And she was right. Despite your comfortable life, you felt something was missing. You missed the feeling of working, of contributing. In Kentucky, even during the hardest years, you had a role. Here you were just Dr. David's mother. The idea came to you one afternoon in September 1986, while you were making lunch. One of David's colleagues had raved about your soup. "Mrs. Clarke, this is the best soup I've ever had. You should open a restaurant." You had just laughed it off at the time, but a seed was planted. Why not? You had always loved to cook. You had savings from selling the pharmacy. And most importantly, you wanted to do something of your own to prove you could stand on your own 2 feet, independent of anyone. You started small. Instead of an expensive restaurant, you launched a homemade meal delivery service called Kentucky Comfort. At first, you cooked right out of your kitchen, making about 10 meals a day. But word of your hearty, Southern-style dishes, cooked with love, spread quickly. 6 months later, you had to rent a small commercial kitchen and hire 2 assistants. And of course, your soup became the star dish, the most beloved item on the menu. How ironic! The dish that had once symbolized your betrayal and pain was now the symbol of your independence and new beginning. It was through Kentucky Comfort that you met Susan. She was a nutritionist at David's hospital and approached you about recommending your meals to patients who needed healthy, nourishing food. Susan was tall with curly hair and a radiant smile. You immediately liked her intelligence and positive energy, and you saw the sparkle in David's eyes when you introduced them. You knew something special was blossoming. You were happy to watch their love story unfold. It was a pure, healthy love built on respect and understanding, everything your marriage had lacked. Their wedding in July 1988 was a simple but elegant affair. Watching David stand beside the woman he loved, you felt a deep sense of pride and contentment. During the reception, your dear friend Gertrude from Kentucky pulled you aside. She handed you a yellowed envelope. "Eleanor, I've kept this for years, waiting for the right time. I think now is the time." Inside was an old photograph. It was Darlene. She was smiling shyly at the camera, and beneath her simple dress, her pregnancy was showing. You felt a lump in your throat. You looked at the young, fragile face in the picture. Now, you no longer felt jealousy or bitterness. You only felt a deep empathy. She was not your rival. You were both victims of the same man's cowardice. I'll give it to David, you decided. He deserves to have this memory. That night after the party, you called David and Susan over. You gave him the photo and explained where it came from. You saw tears well up in David's eyes, as for the first time in his life, he saw a clear image of his birth mother pregnant with him. She was beautiful, he whispered. He hugged you tightly, a wordless embrace that conveyed all his gratitude. In that moment, you felt a great wound from the past finally begin to close. The following years were filled with joy and prosperity. In 1991, Susan became pregnant. The happiness you felt was indescribable. You, the woman who had never experienced childbirth, were about to become a grandmother. In February 1992, your first grandson, Andrew, was born. As you held the chubby baby in your arms, you had a strange feeling. There was something familiar about his tiny face. And then you saw it. On the baby's right cheek, a faint, almost imperceptible birthmark. The Clarke family birthmark. The one Arthur had, David had, and now your grandson had. But this time, it wasn't a sign of a guilty secret. It was a sign of continuation of a new generation that would write a different story, one built on truth and love. 3 years later, your granddaughter Emily was born with the same large, expressive eyes as Darlene. In 1998, when your restaurant was thriving and your life was settled, a woman from the past suddenly appeared. An elegant, tall woman in her 70s came to the restaurant and asked for you. "Mrs. Clarke," she said, "my name is Bernice Adams. I am Darlene's older sister." Your world tilted on its axis. Darlene's sister Arthur had always said Darlene was an orphan with no living relatives. Another lie. Bernice explained that she had spent years searching for her sister. She only knew that Darlene had worked for a family named Clarke in Oakage, and then suddenly vanished. She had thought perhaps her sister had forgotten her family after finding a better life. She would never do that, Bernice insisted. Something must have happened. You told her the whole truth. You showed her the latest photo of David Susan and their 2 children. "This is your nephew, and these are your great-niece and great-nephew." Bernice cried the silent tears of both grief and relief. The meeting between David and his aunt was one of the most moving moments you had ever witnessed. For the first time, David heard stories about his mother's childhood, learned that he had cousins back in Kentucky. A missing piece of his life's puzzle was finally found. Bernice's arrival brought a new depth to your family. It connected David to his roots, helping him understand more about the mother he never knew. Seeing the family reunited, seeing the wounds of the past slowly healing through truth and love, you felt a profound peace you never thought possible. You realized your journey was never just about revenge or finding your own happiness. Unwittingly, you had become the enforcer of justice for Darlene, restoring her honor and reconnecting the family that had been torn apart by deceit. The circle of the past had finally closed, not with bitterness, but with reconciliation and understanding. The years passed in the blink of an eye. It seemed like only yesterday. You were a 50-year-old woman new to Chicago, and now, looking back, you were 78, your hair as white as snow, but your soul more at peace than ever. Your restaurant, Kentucky Comfort, had become a small legend in Chicago. From a home meal delivery service, it had grown into a chain of 3 reputable restaurants where people came for a taste of warmth and sincerity. At 70, you decided it was time to step back. Susan, the daughter-in-law you loved like your own daughter, with her natural business acumen, took over general management. And Emily, your granddaughter, seemed to have inherited your love for cooking completely. You still remember the day she just turned 13. At the time, stood in the kitchen and said, "Grandma, can you teach me how to make your soup exactly like yours? I want to learn all the secrets." Seeing the fire of passion in her eyes brought you so much joy. In the years that followed, you passed down not just the recipes, but the stories behind each dish, and most importantly, the love that must be seasoned into every pot of soup. Now at 23, Emily was a professional chef, running the main kitchen and introducing innovative new twists. You're not sad about the changes, are you? She once asked, worriedly. You just smiled warmly. My dear tradition only survives if it knows how to reinvent itself. If I had clung to the past, I never would have left Oakage. Andrew. Your grandson followed a different path. He had David's calm demeanor and kind heart. Medicine chose him just as it had chosen his father. At 26, Andrew was a pediatric surgery resident. I want to give children the chance to grow up healthy and happy just like I did. He told you, watching your 2 grandchildren grow up building their lives on the values you and David had strived to instill, you felt the greatest satisfaction of your life. And David, the son that fate had brought you, was now one of the most respected surgeons in Chicago. At 57, he was at the peak of his career. Every time you saw your son speaking confidently before hundreds of people, you remembered the shy, frightened boy in the small house on the edge of town. Life was truly miraculous. In 2012, a letter from Oakage disturbed your peace. It was from Gertrude. She wrote that the old Clarke pharmacy had been demolished to build a shopping center. And during the demolition, workers had found a metal box hidden in a false wall. Since you were the last known owner, the box was being sent to you. The day the rusty, heavy box arrived, you felt like a ghost from the past was knocking at your door. You didn't open it alone. You gathered the whole family, David, Susan, Andrew, and Emily. Whatever is in here, you said, belongs to all of us. It's a piece of our family's story. When the lock sprang open inside was a treasure trove of memories, old photographs, documents, letters, and a diary. Arthur's diary. The family read it together, page by page, and the final truth, more complex and painful than you had ever known, was revealed. The diary began in 1955 when Arthur met Darlene. He had loved her, a genuine but weak love. When Darlene became pregnant, Arthur's father, a tyrannical man, found out and gave him an ultimatum. Either give up the country girl and marry a woman of equal standing you, or be disowned and lose his inheritance. And Arthur, a cowardly and materialistic man, made his choice. He chose security reputation and built a double life. He married you without love while keeping Darlene hidden in the shadows. Reading his words, you felt a complex emotion rise within you. The anger was still there, but mixed with it was a sad pity. You didn't pity the betrayer, but the weak man who had built his own prison with his poor choices. The last pages of the diary described his desperation when Darlene died. "I buried Darlene at dawn alone," he wrote. "No priest, no prayers, no headstone. May God forgive me. May Darlene forgive me for not having the courage to love you as you deserved." But the most shocking discovery lay at the bottom of the box, a never-sent letter addressed to David, written in 1984, a year before Arthur died. With trembling hands, David read the letter aloud to the family. In it, Arthur begged for his son's forgiveness. He admitted to all his cowardice, his selfishness. And then he wrote the words you had never heard directly. "Eleanor did for you what I was never brave enough to do. She gave you love, dignity, a future. She was more of a father to you than I ever was. I hope that one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me." You looked at your son, a 57-year-old man, weeping. Finally, he had received the apology he had perhaps subconsciously been waiting for his entire life. You didn't know if David would ever truly forgive his father, but you could see that the letter had brought him a sense of peace, a release that he needed. Together, your family decided to do something meaningful. Using a crude map from the diary, you found where Darlene had been buried. With the authorities' permission, you had her remains moved to a proper resting place in a cemetery next to a memorial you had erected years ago. Finally, she had a place to rest in peace. The money and gold found in the box were used to establish a scholarship fund in Darlene Adams's name, helping single mothers and disadvantaged young women pursue their education, giving others the chance that Darlene was denied. A few months ago, on a Thursday afternoon, you gathered the whole family at the First Kentucky Comfort restaurant. 3 generations around one table. The occasion wasn't a holiday, but a milestone 50 years since the stormy night that changed your life forever. At 78, you went into the kitchen yourself to prepare the soup. Emily stood beside you, helping and learning the final secrets. When everyone was seated and the steaming, fragrant bowls of soup were served, you raised your glass. "To life," you said, your voice trembling with emotion. "For always surprising us. To the pain that taught us to cherish joy. To the mistakes that showed us new paths. And to love which always endures, always transforms, and always heals." Looking at the beloved faces around the table, you thought about how a story that began with lies, betrayal, and heartbreak could have ultimately created so much love and life. You thought about Arthur, about Darlene, and how their choices, right or wrong, led to the existence of all these wonderful people here today. And you thought about yourself, the heartbroken young woman on that rainy night. How could she have ever imagined that the bitter truth would be the beginning of a journey of strength, growth, and unconditional love. That night, after everyone had gone home, you stayed behind at the restaurant alone. You ladled a small, remaining portion of soup into a simple container, just like the ones from long ago. You stepped outside and looked up at the starry Chicago sky. "Thank you," you whispered to the universe. "Now, whenever you make your soup, you no longer think of the betrayal. You think of the family you built, of the love that blossomed from the ashes of a broken marriage. And that is the legacy you want to leave behind. That our lives are not defined by the bad things that happen to us, but by how we rise to meet them." Your story began with a betrayal discovered over a bowl of soup. But it didn't end there. It continues in the smiles of your grandchildren, in the success of your son, and in the love that turned pain into a beautiful legacy. If you found this story helpful, please like and subscribe to Porchlight Diaries so I can keep sharing. Comment where you're watching from and which part touched your heart. Maybe it'll send a little hope to someone who needs it today. Thank you for listening with such kindness.